8 helicopters lifted off a carrier in the Arabian Sea. 5 of them reached the desert. None of them reached Tehran. The rescue force never got within 200 miles of the hostages it came for. And by morning, 8 Americans were dead in a place that had no name, only a call sign, Desert 1. This is the operation that failed so completely that the United States rebuilt its entire special operations establishment around never repeating it. On the 4th of November 1979, Iranian students came over the wall of the American embassy in Tehran and took 66 Americans hostage. By the middle of that month, 13 were released, all of them women or African Americans. 53 were not. Those 53 waited out 5 months of failed negotiation. And on the 16th of April, Jimmy Carter approved a military rescue. The plan had 2 halves that had to meet in the dark. 6 aircraft would leave Masra in Oman and fly more than 1,000 miles, carrying 132 men. 8 helicopters would lift off the deck of the Nimitz and fly 600 miles to the same patch of salt flat in central Iran. They would refuel there, load the assault force, and fly on another 260 miles to a hide site called Desert 2, where they would wait out the daylight. The following night, the helicopters would lift the hostages out of Tehran to a stadium, then to a captured airfield 60 miles from the city, where 2 transports from Saudi Arabia would take everyone home. Every single one of those steps had to work. Every one of the 4 armed services was given a piece of the operation. The investigation afterward would call that problem not a strength. On the 7th of April, the United States broke off relations with Iran. Cyrus Vance, the Secretary of State, had spent months arguing against a military solution. On Thursday the 10th, he left Washington for a long weekend in Florida. On Friday the 11th, his rival Zbigniew Brzezinski convened a newly scheduled meeting of the National Security Council, where he said it was time to lance the boil. Carter said it was time to bring our hostages home, and confirmed at that meeting that he had authorized the mission. The Secretary of State was not in the room. When Vance found out, he decided to resign whether the raid succeeded or failed. On the 31st of March, a U.S. Air Force combat controller named John Carney was flown into Iran in a small propeller aircraft by 2 CIA pilots and landed in the dark on the salt flat they had chosen. He walked the ground alone. He buried remotely operated infrared lights and a strobe to mark out a landing pattern that would be invisible to the naked eye and clearly lit through night vision goggles. And he took soil samples to find out whether the desert would hold the weight of a fully loaded Hercules. It would. The surface he tested was hard-packed sand, but in the 3 weeks between that survey and the mission, sandstorms laid down a fresh layer of fine powder, ankle-deep, across the whole site. The ground they had tested was not the ground they landed on. On the 24th of April, 6 aircraft lifted out of Masra and turned north. 8 helicopters came off the deck of the Nimitz behind them, repainted in sand camouflage with their markings stripped off. Overhead, 2 carrier air wings flew cover with recognition stripes on their right wings, because Iran was flying F-14s and F-4s the United States had sold to the Shah, and American pilots could not tell an enemy fighter from their own by shape alone. The first aircraft down was a combat Talon at 10:47 at night. It came in completely blacked out onto a runway that did not exist. Weeks earlier, a combat controller had buried infrared lights in the salt flat in a pattern that was invisible to the naked eye and clearly lit through night vision goggles. The aircraft was heavy, and the ground was unknown, so it made 4 separate passes over the strip just to be certain nothing was on it. Then it put its wheels on Iranian soil. Jeeps came off the ramp and the road watch teams went out to both ends of the dirt road, because that is what Desert 1 was, not an airfield, a track through the desert that happened to be flat enough and hard enough to land a Hercules on. The runway was a public road. 12 Rangers were supposed to keep it closed for the few hours the operation needed it, in a country of 38 million people. Minutes later, headlights. A civilian bus came down the road, doing exactly what buses do, carrying a driver and 43 passengers through the desert at night. The Rangers stopped it. They took all 44 of them off it and put them aboard one of the aircraft under guard. The most secret operation in the United States military had been on the ground for a matter of minutes, and it already had 44 witnesses sitting in the back of the transport. Then a second set of headlights, and this one did not stop. A fuel tanker, almost certainly smuggling, came straight at the roadblock, ignoring every order to halt. A Ranger put a shoulder-fired rocket into it. The truck went up in a column of fire. Its passenger was killed. The driver got out, ran, and was picked up by a pickup truck that had been following behind, and he vanished into the desert knowing exactly what he had seen. And then the thing nobody planned for. The burning tanker lit the desert for miles in every direction. Somewhere out in that darkness were 8 helicopters, late, lost, flying without lights and without a horizon, looking for one unlit patch of salt flat in the middle of Iran. The fire the Rangers had just started was the brightest object for 100 miles. It guided them in. The operation was compromised and rescued by the same burning truck. 2 hours into the flight, a warning light told the crew of Bluebeard 6 that a rotor blade was cracking. There's no margin in that. They put the helicopter down in open desert in the middle of a hostile country and waited. Another helicopter landed beside them, took the crew aboard, and lifted off again. They left the aircraft sitting in the sand, intact, in Iran. 8 had launched, 7 were still flying. Ahead of them was a wall of dust hundreds of feet high. A Haboob, fine powder, lifted off the desert floor, thick enough to be opaque, and nobody had briefed it because nobody had been looking for it. They flew into it. Inside there was no horizon, no ground, no sky, and no reference of any kind at night information at low level. Bluebeard 5 lost its flight instruments to an electrical failure while it was in there. Flying blind with no instruments is not a difficult situation. It is an unsurvivable one. It turned around and went back to the ship. 8 had launched, 6 were still going. The 6 that got through came into Desert 1 between 50 and 90 minutes behind schedule. Every one of those minutes came out of the darkness they needed to cross the rest of Iran and hide before sunrise. The last one down was Bluebeard 2 at 1 o'clock in the morning with a failed secondary hydraulic system. One hydraulic system left to fly a helicopter loaded with men into a city. The senior helicopter pilot looked at it and refused. So the arithmetic at Desert 1 was this: 6 helicopters on the ground, 1 of them unsafe, 5 that could fly. The plan required 6, and here's the detail that has haunted this operation ever since. The planners had set the threshold at 6 when only 4 were absolutely necessary to carry out the mission. The number that stopped the raid was not a physical limit. It was a margin somebody had written down months earlier in a different room on a different continent. 5 helicopters were sitting on that salt flat, fueled, with the assault force standing beside them. By the arithmetic that actually mattered, they had 1 more than they needed. 2 commanders, both right, could not both get what they needed. The senior helicopter pilot would not send men into Tehran in an aircraft with 1 hydraulic system. The ground commander would not cut his assault team down to fit 5 airframes. Neither position was unreasonable. Neither man could give way without accepting a risk he believed would kill people. The aviation commander broke the tie by recommending they stop. It went up the chain to Egypt. And from Egypt to the White House, and the president agreed. The recommendation went by satellite radio from a salt flat in Iran to a command post in Egypt to the White House. And then they waited. The aircraft sat on the ground with their engines running, burning fuel they did not have, while a decision was made 8,000 miles away. By the time the president's confirmation to abort came back, they had been on the ground for 2.5 hours. Every minute of that had a cost, and the bill came due immediately. One transport was now critically short of fuel. It had emptied its bladders into 3 helicopters and had nothing left for itself, so it had to leave right then, already loaded with part of Delta Force. Another helicopter needed fuel and had to cross to the far side of the road. To let both of those happen, a 3rd helicopter parked directly behind the transport had to move, and it could not taxi on the ground. It had to lift into a hover and slide sideways in the dark, over a surface that 3 weeks of sandstorms had turned to powder. A combat controller stood out in front of the helicopter to guide it, and when the pilot pulled power, the rotor tore the ground into a wall of dust and blasted him with it. He backed away from it. He had no choice. But inside that cloud, the pilot could see nothing at all except the one man in front of him, and when that man moved backwards, the pilot read it as his own aircraft sliding backwards and pushed forward to hold the distance. The main rotor came down into the transport's tail. The helicopter went into the wing root, and the wing was full of fuel. What was left was a burning aircraft full of ammunition and a second one full of men. They pulled who they could out of both. Crews ran for the remaining transports across open ground lit by their own wreckage. Somebody tried to go back for the classified mission documents still sitting in the abandoned helicopters and could not reach them. Somebody else tried to destroy the aircraft and was told to stop. Because the helicopters were loaded with ammunition, and setting them alight would have killed everyone still standing on that strip. 8 men died in the fire. 5 of the 14 Air Force crew aboard the transport, 3 of the 5 Marines in the helicopter. Only its pilot and co-pilot came out, both badly burned. 4 more were injured. In Tehran, a cleric displayed remains and claimed 9 Americans had died and 9 caskets were prepared, but the number was 8. Their bodies came home on the 6th of May. 3 of them, 2 majors and a sergeant, are buried together at Arlington under a single shared headstone, about 25 feet from the memorial to all of them. The survivors crowded onto the remaining transports and left. They tried, in the few minutes they had, to get their classified mission documents back out of the abandoned helicopters and failed. They could not destroy the aircraft either because the helicopters were loaded with ammunition and setting them on fire would have killed everyone still standing on that strip. So they left 5 of them sitting in the desert, largely intact, with the plans still inside. 2 were later taken into service by the Iranian Navy and flown for years by the country the raid had been mounted against. Tehran, the Ayatollah Khomeini told the country what had happened in the desert. Who crushed Mr. Carter's helicopters, he asked. We did. The Sands did. They were God's agents. These Sands are agents of God. They can try again. In Washington, the explanation was a dust storm nobody forecast, on top of mechanical failures that had already cost 2 aircraft before the storm was ever reached. Both sides told the story that suited them. Both were describing the same weather. Well, there's a footnote to Desert One that almost nobody tells. The next day, an Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander drove out to the site to investigate what the locals were reporting. While he was there, Iranian fighter jets were sent to destroy the abandoned American equipment on the direct order of Iran's president. They did not know he was there. The strike killed him, and for the hostages, the consequence was immediate. They were broken up and moved across Iran, held apart in separate cities, specifically so that no second rescue could ever be attempted. Within 2 weeks of Desert One, the Pentagon started planning to go back. A new organization ran a program of joint exercises under the name Honey Badger, and one problem kept coming back: the helicopters. They had been the weak link and everybody knew it, so the answer was to do it without them. The plan was to land a Hercules transport inside a football stadium in the middle of Tehran, directly across the street from the embassy. Load the hostages and the assault force, get it airborne again out of the same stadium, and then land the airplane on an aircraft carrier, because they expected 50 wounded, and that was the fastest way to a hospital. On the 29th of October, they flew the full profile. The takeoff was perfect and set short takeoff records. Then it came into land. The rockets that stop the aircraft fire in sets, and the upper set goes off first, right beside the cockpit. The flight engineer, blinded by that flash, believed they were already on the runway and fired the lower set. They were still in the air. The braking rockets underneath never fired at all. The aeroplane's forward speed dropped to nothing and it fell onto the runway, breaking its right wing between the engines. Everyone got out. The wreck was dismantled and buried where it lay for security. 2 months later, the hostages were released by negotiation, and nobody ever tried again. The 44 Iranians from the bus were let go and gave eyewitness accounts of everything they had seen. The CIA team inside Tehran read about Desert One in the local news, understood that the operation was over, and quietly walked out of the country. The Iranians never knew they had been there. The hostages came home on the 20th of January 1981, minutes after Ronald Reagan finished taking the oath of office. 444 days. Carter, who authorized the raid and then had to go on television and explain it, blamed his defeat mainly on failing to bring them back. The investigation into what happened at Desert One did not blame the weather. It blamed mission planning, command and control, and the inability of 4 services to operate as one. The response took years. A single unified command for American Special Operations, which became operational in 1987. A dedicated aviation regiment of pilots trained specifically to fly low, at night on instruments, because the raid had proved the Army did not have them. A permanent joint communications unit, because at Desert One the radios had not talked to each other either. Almost every American Special Operations capability that exists today can be traced back to a burning strip of salt flat and 8 men who did not come home from it. The hostages were released 9 months later, and not one of them was freed by force. 8 helicopters lifted off a carrier in the Arabian Sea. 5 of them reached the desert. None of them reached Tehran. They never got within 200 miles of the people they came for. And everything the United States built afterward, every command and every unit that exists today to do this properly, exists because of one night on a strip of salt flat that was never supposed to matter. This is danger close. Every mission we cover is reconstructed from the record, with the sources named on screen and the parts nobody can agree on left as questions. If that is the kind of history you want, subscribe, and the next one is waiting.